My Hero Academia had the best premise in modern shonen manga. A world where 80% of people have superpowers, quirks, and the 1% who are born without them are treated as lesser. The protagonist, Izuku Midoriya, is quirkless, and the entire first arc is about a quirkless person getting access to power and choosing what to do with it. That premise is about class, about systemic exclusion, about inherited privilege versus earned ability. It is a genuinely interesting foundation. My Hero Academia did not fully use it. Instead it built towards something more conventional, and understanding exactly where it departed from its own premise tells you a lot about how long-running shonen series work and what they sometimes lose. I want to be clear, My Hero Academia is not a bad show. It has produced some of the best individual arcs in shonen anime, the sports festival, the provisional license exam, the overhaul arc. It has excellent fight choreography, genuine emotional beats, and characters people care about deeply. This is not a takedown. It is an honest accounting of what the show was, what it could have been, and where the gap between those things sits. The most interesting version of My Hero Academia existed in its premise and in Tamura Shigaraki. What the show chose to do with both of those things is where the argument starts. The quirkless discrimination in MHA's world is introduced as a systemic injustice. 80% of people have power, 20% do not, and the 20% are structurally disadvantaged. Deku is one of them. When he inherits All Might's quirk, the natural dramatic question is, what does access to power reveal about the system that denied him power in the first place? The show asks this question in the first 2 seasons. Then it mostly stops asking it. The quirkless discrimination fades into background detail. The show becomes more interested in individual heroics than in the structural critique its premise implied. This is not a betrayal. It is a choice. But it is the choice that made MHA a good shonen series instead of a great one. Tamura Shigaraki is the most fully realized character in My Hero Academia. He begins as a petulant villain, a child throwing a tantrum at society, and over the course of the series he becomes something more disturbing and more interesting, a person who was failed by heroic society at its most fundamental level, who understood the system's hypocrisy before Deku did, and who chose to destroy rather than reform because reform felt like asking his abusers to be kinder. His arc is the show's actual argument about what heroic society costs the people it excludes. Every scene with Shigaraki in the later arcs is the version of MHA that the premise promised. The show around him is less sure of what it wants to say. My Hero Academia is on Crunchyroll. The final arc is currently airing in the anime. Subscribe for more analysis. I cover what shonen is doing underneath the action. The final arc of My Hero Academia, currently being adapted, is about All for One's endgame and Deku's ultimate confrontation with Shigaraki. It is large, ambitious, and frequently very good in the manga. It also makes a specific choice. It resolves Shigaraki's arc in a way that ultimately centers Deku's heroism rather than Shigaraki's worldview. This is not wrong. It is what shonen requires. But there is a version of the final arc that lets Shigaraki win the argument even as he loses the fight, a version that takes the class critique in the premise seriously enough to make the hero earn his victory by grappling with the structural problem, not just defeating the symptom of it. The show gets close. It does not fully go there. MHA at its best is the overhaul arc, an antagonist whose power is explicitly about restoration of hierarchy, whose goal is to make quirks a privilege again, whose child hostage Eri represents the cost of that worldview to the most vulnerable people in the society. The overhaul arc is the most direct the show ever gets about what its premise is really saying. It also has the best fight sequence in the series. The show's best moments are when it trusts its own premise enough to make the villain's ideology the actual stakes. More of that and MHA would be the definitive shonen of its generation. What it is instead is the most popular shonen of its generation. That is not nothing. But the gap is real. My Hero Academia is on Crunchyroll. The final arc manga is complete. I will not spoil how it ends. The anime is catching up. If you want my honest take, the sports festival arc and the overhaul arc are worth watching regardless of where the series lands overall. Subscribe for more of this. I covered One Piece recently, a long-running shonen that has gotten more consistent about its central argument as it has gone on, which is an interesting contrast.